Let's do this. Late. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. He's late and he has work for me to do too. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ba'd. Okay, where did we leave off last time? Huh? What did you say? Where exactly did we leave off? One brother who didn't come last time, he asked me, what did we cover? I said, the history of Usul al-Fiqh. He said, oh, alhamdulillah, I didn't miss anything yet. You missed the difference between Qawa'id Fiqhiyya and Qawa'id Usuliyya. طيب. Where did we leave off last time? Quickly. Okay. So we got to the point. Okay, quickly, where were these people mostly? Ahl al-Hadith? Hijaz. Okay. And these people? Iraq. Okay. Okay, last time we discussed why basically they developed in those areas. So we want to go on from here. What we found in this group here, what happened in history, is that this group was able to relate lots of hadith, had lots of reports from Sahaba and so forth. But when it came to understanding them, and when it came to interpreting what these hadith actually meant, there was some weakness here on these people's part. And they were very good at preserving hadith and passing them on correctly. But the actual understanding, and for many of them, of course. Obviously, Imam Malik is one of these. I don't think anyone would say that Imam Malik did not understand the hadith that he was passing on. And with respect to this group, as we mentioned last time, they had a distrust for the little hadith that they had, and therefore they based a lot of their opinion on Ra'i here. But the problem, yes, the problem?
Something wrong with
You want us to wait? Or? Mustafa, don't play with this. Rashid, Baba, right? Don't play with this. I was playing with you, you're not playing with it. Ready, Osman? Okay. But the main problem with them, as I said, they used to try to look at the reasoning behind the ahkam, or the reasons behind the laws of the Sharia. The main problem with them is that they were not very consistent. They basically had no set way of reasoning for many of them. Again, obviously there's some exceptions. For example, Abu Hanifa is one of this group. And Abu Hanifa, of course, was very consistent. But in general, if you're talking about Iraq and Hijaz in general, these are some of the problems. You can look it up later. So that was the situation around the beginning of the 3rd century Hijri, around 200. Or let's say between 150 to 200. Okay.
That's when Imam.
Yeah. Abu Hanifa, when did Abu Hanifa die? For those in the hadith class from last year. He lived from 90 to 150 or something? 84 to 150, of course, في اختلاف. Well, Imam Malik was born around 90. So let's change this to 100 to 200. Okay.
Do you have any example of
Yes, I think we'll get to one, inshallah. Okay. Pardon me? That. This is basically what the situation I was describing was from 100 to 200. Hijri, yes.
What did you say about the birth of Imam Malik?
This is Imam Malik. Imam Malik was born around 90 also. Very close to. I don't remember his date of death. Any North Africans happen to know?
You speak now about this period.
This is the period that these groups were being solidified, you can say. Okay. All right. And then last time I talked about who was the first one to write about usul al-fiqh. Actually, I didn't ask that question. Now I'm asking it. Who was the first one to write about usul al-fiqh? Is that right? When did usul al-fiqh begin? Okay, when did usul al-fiqh begin? Okay, as we talked about last time, usul al-fiqh actually began during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it developed over time. Now, before Imam Shafi'i, there were writings about usul al-fiqh. For example, Wasil ibn Attar, the famous for being Mu'tazili, it is said that he had a book, or he had some writing related to usul al-fiqh. Also, Abu Yusuf, the companion of Abu Hanifa, he is credited with having a book called Usul al-Fiqh, but this book has not survived until today. And even some of the Malikis, they claim that Imam Malik was the first one to write about Usul al-Fiqh. But it seems the first one to really have an organized writing of the different topics of Usul al-Fiqh and covering them in detail was Imam Shafi'i. And what's the name of his book? He wrote many, but what's the name of his famous book in Usul al-Fiqh? Al-Risala. And why is it called Al-Risala? He used to refer to it as Al-Kitab. In our book we said. But it became famous as Al-Risala. Why?
Maybe he wrote it to somebody.
Exactly, yeah. Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi. Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi was actually from Ahl al-Hadith, but seeing this situation himself, he wrote to Imam Shafi'i, and he asked Imam Shafi'i to write a book, and he's describing how to understand the Qur'an and how to use different evidences that we now call the Adilla of Usul al-Fiqh. Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi. Well, that's a difficult question to answer. And he wrote to Imam Shafi'i to ask him to write a book which is concerning what we now call Usul al-Fiqh.
Was he a ruler?
No, he was Muhaddith. Very famous Muhaddith.
Where was
he? He was living, at the time that he asked Shafi'i to write, Shafi'i was in Baghdad. So Abdurrahman Abdurrahman was someplace else. I don't remember. Yeah, he wasn't in Baghdad. Yeah. But I don't remember exactly where he was. Okay, if we look at some of the characteristics of Imam Shafi'i, okay, this is kind of advertisement for the Shafi'i madhab, so please. Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi. First of all, where's Imam Shafi'i from? Okay, he was born in Palestine, but where did he didn't stay in Palestine very long. He grew up where? In Mecca. Yeah, he is one of the descendants, or actually he's one of the relatives of the Prophet Muhammad. In Mecca he learned the school of Ibn Abbas. What do I mean by that? Obviously he was not Imam Shafi'i, by the way, he died in the year 204. Okay, that's when he died. The school of Ibn Abbas, meaning in Mecca at that time, when it came to understanding the Quran, the tafsir of the Quran, how to understand the asbab al-nuzul, or the reasons behind the revelation of the Qur'an, and other finer points of the Qur'an. Mecca was famous for the students of Ibn Abbas and passing on this knowledge of Ibn Abbas. Okay. Way of thinking, Ibn Abbas. Okay. Ibn Abbas was a little bit unique in, not unique in the sense that he was different, but he was basically more advanced than many other people. Also, in Mecca, he studied hadith under the scholars of hadith in Mecca at that time. Pardon? Yeah, what I'm talking about here is what he's famous for, what his students were famous for in Mecca was the style of making tafsir of the Qur'an. Okay. Secondly, also, while young, he spent some time with maybe Saad's relatives, with the Bedouins. Slowly. He's still young. But what's important? This is now fairly young. This is now fairly young here. Okay. The advantage of that is that he became expert in the Arabic language. Okay. As everyone knows, this used to be the case, that the Bedouin language is purer than the other people's languages. But we have proof nowadays that that's not necessarily the case. What did he do next? Tahama, if Abdulaziz was here, he can tell you that. More importantly, okay, from a scholarly life point of view, what did he do after that? Okay, he went to Medina and he studied under Imam Malik. Okay. And Imam Malik found him to be an excellent student. Although there's a story about him, the first time he sat in Malik's circle, Imam Shafi was somewhat poor when he first traveled. So he used to sit there with a piece of straw and write in his hand. So Imam Malik was a little bit upset. He thought he's just playing. But actually he's writing the hadith because, as I just told this brother, and when you write it down it's easier to learn for some people. So after the lecture, Imam Malik took him aside and asked him, why is he playing? And he said, I'm doing this to memorize the hadith. And he read back from his memory, obviously, all of the hadith that he had written with straw in his hand. He stayed with Imam Malik until Imam Malik died. Okay, he became a close companion of Imam Malik. So, obviously, he is by now already considered fairly good in the Hijazi or Ahl al-Hadith school. Although he wasn't really considered Sheikh by then. What happened next? Related to what we're talking about here. Okay, he had to go to Baghdad. Why did he have to go to Baghdad? No, why did he have to go to Baghdad? Why was he ordered? Okay, he was ordered to stand in front of the... who were the Khulafa at that time? Okay, it was during the Abbasiyya time. He was ordered to appear in front of the Khalifa because they claimed that he was supporting one of the Zaydi Imams against the Khalifa. And one of the Fuqaha so he went to Baghdad. Okay. And there's one story, seems to be fairly strong, that one of the Fuqaha of Baghdad or of Iraq went to Baghdad to intercede on his behalf. And to talk to the ruler on his behalf. Who was that? No. Ibn Hanbal is one of his students. And in fact he studied under him in Mecca much later, after he returned to Mecca. The one who interceded on his behalf was Muhammad Al-Hassan, Muhammad Hassan Al-Shaybani. Okay, and who's this? Okay, this is one, along with Abu Yusuf, this is the most important of the students of Abu Hanifa. Okay. And it was at this time in Baghdad that Imam Shafi began to debate Shaybani. Isn't that nice? Saves him from being killed, and then he starts refuting his views. Okay? At this time, when he was debating Shaybani in his early years, he was representing this school. Okay? But the difference between him was when he argued, and he wasn't like the other people of Ahl al-Hadith that they had seen. And he'd just be able to repeat the Hadith without understanding them. He was able to understand the Hadith and therefore refute some of the views of Shaybani. After that, he traveled for some time. He went back to Mecca, he went back to Baghdad. The next time in Baghdad, this is when he wrote the first version of Ar-Risala. This is the version that he sent to Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi. Okay? So what we see here is that he was able to view pretty much the whole situation and study both sides. Okay? When he was in Baghdad, he didn't just debate with Shaybani obviously, but he also learned more of the fiqh of Iraq or Ahl al-Ra'y. So the first version of Risala he wrote while in Baghdad. The second time he went to Baghdad. That version doesn't exist today. Okay, but he finally settled where? Okay, he finally settled in Egypt. Okay. And it was in Egypt. Pardon me? It was in Fustat, Egypt. Okay? In Egypt he wrote the second version of Ar-Risala, the one that exists today. Okay? And it was in Egypt where he really began to put everything together and begin his new madhab. He has an earlier version of his Risala from Baghdad, but not from this trip, a later trip. And then he has the second version, the one that exists today, which is in the library at Dar Mecca if you ever want to take a look at it. We don't have it in our library. It's lost.
What happened in the missing link here?
Oh, he did lots of things. He traveled back to Mecca, then he went back to Baghdad, and then he went to Egypt. And in between also he went between... Ibn Hanbal was his student around the year 200.
In Mecca?
In Mecca was the first time they met, yeah. Okay. Now, Imam Shafi is considered by many people to be Mujaddid. What's the meaning of Mujaddid? Do you have the same word in Turkish? I hope. Like Badiou Zaman Said Nursi, okay? How about in Indonesian? No? Shucks. Okay, Mujaddid. Mujaddid is the one who renews things, and if things stray from the way they're supposed to be, he brings them back to the way that they're supposed to be. So he was considered the first, not the first, but he's considered by many people to be Mujaddid. Of course, we cannot really say for sure who is Mujaddid. And the reason he was considered Mujaddid is because this Risala, besides being the first book, like textbook on Usul al-Fiqh, it is the book that basically changed the history of Usul al-Fiqh. Okay? His goal in Ar-Risala was, of course, obviously to put an end to the chaos and the inconsistency that he saw between these two schools of fiqh, and to return fiqh back to the way it was during the Prophet and during the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidun, or the rightly guided Khulafa. Okay? Any questions about his life? The important thing to note is this one, Arabic language, his familiarity with both of these schools. That's the important thing. That's what really benefited him.
Shafi'i has two madhabs, one in Egypt and the last one in Egypt. When the first one before Egypt, Baghdad. Is that true?
Yes.
And what's the difference?
Okay, basically, when he went to Baghdad, he went as really a representative of Ahl al-Hadith. And he went there and he debated with them. This is even the second time he went. He was still basically a representative of Ahl al-Hadith. After this first time he went to Baghdad and Muhammad al-Hasan al-Shaybani had to save him from the Khalifa, he went back to Mecca. He went back to Medina. Mecca or Medina, one of those two. And he started to teach in the mosque. But he had changed many of his opinions because of his debates with the Shaybani. So he started giving many opinions that were not popular with the Maliki followers in the Hijaz. So, and then after that he went back to Baghdad again. His second trip to Baghdad is where he was really known as a scholar, as a sheikh. And people began to take his opinions. But his usul al-fiqh was still really developing. And we find the final version of it in Egypt. So he changed many of his opinions, not because of, like some people said that he changed his opinions because he faced different situations in Iraq as he did in Egypt. You'll find this in many books, but that's not true. The reason he changed his opinions is basically his usul al-fiqh was changing.
Is there any book besides this book during that time?
Besides Al-Risala? There were some writings about specific topics. About usul al-fiqh as a whole? No. He was the first one to write about usul al-fiqh as a whole.
Did you mention the first version, the second version?
In Kitab al-Umm, one of his other books, he refers to the first version and the second version. I assume that the second version is much longer and much more drawn out. If the story of Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi is true, the first version is probably fairly short and discusses just a few topics. Yeah. So let's see what are some of the major points. As I said, and what he did basically revolutionized usul al-fiqh. So let's see what are the basic points of his Risala. One, with respect to the Qur'an. You want me to put the heading? What is this? The basic points of Risala. Or you can call it the basic points of the tajdeed of Imam al-Shafi'i. First of all, with respect to the Qur'an, he said that the Qur'an contains guidance for every aspect of human life. But before I forget, there's one more point here, if you permit me to go back. And besides seeing this, or having the background in both areas, there's another thing that influenced Imam Shafi'i a lot to write his Risala. And that was that during this period, lots of non-Arabs were embracing Islam. And these non-Arabs, even after they learned Arabic, they didn't have the knowledge of Arabic required really to understand the Quran properly. So another thing behind his Risala was this aspect, that there was people who were not proficient enough in Arabic language to make rulings or to make fatawa, even though they may have been doing so. So the first point he says is that the Quran contains guidance for every aspect of life, but you have to be able to understand the Quran. Make sense? And for example, he talks about general statements and particular statements. What I mean by that in Arabic is am, khas, am wa khas. Okay? He says in the Arabic language there are some statements that are general and they are meant to be general. There are other statements that are particular, khas, and they are meant to be particular. And there are some statements which are general and they are meant to be khas. He says you will find all three in the Qur'an. And you have to be able to understand what the Qur'an is talking about. The Qur'an might use a general term, but in fact it means something particular. This is perfectly acceptable in the Arabic language. And it was something the Qur'an uses. So the first part, or actually the second part of Risala, is basically talking about language. And later, inshallah, in the class, we'll talk about some of those aspects. So the first thing that he stresses is that in order to understand the Qur'an, you have to understand the language of the Qur'an, and he brought some examples of how people do not understand these principles correctly. Now, during the time of the Sahaba, there was no need for someone like Imam Shafi'i to record these things. Because, as I mentioned last time, the Sahaba, their language was excellent. They understood the Qur'an because they lived the Qur'an during the life of the Prophet, and also because their language was excellent. So there was no need for anyone to write down these principles. But as I mentioned, because of the new Muslims who were not that familiar with the Arabic language, there became a need to write down these principles, and it's considered, or Imam Shafi'i is the first one to be considered, or the first one, he is considered to be the first one to have recorded these principles. Secondly, he stressed that the real meaning of the Qur'an is to be found where? Pardon me? Okay. In the application and the explanation of the Prophet. No, Prophet. I'm talking about Risala, Imam Shafi'i. It's to be found in the explanation and application of the Prophet. Okay, nowadays that doesn't sound like anything radical. Right? But it has become to the point, especially in Iraq, where they used to reason from the Qur'an, and they argued that sometimes the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ was going against the Qur'an, and so therefore they didn't follow the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Imam Shafi'i's answer to that is that the way the Qur'an is actually to be applied is to be found in the explanation and application of the Prophet. In other words, he argued extensively that you're not going to find any sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that contradicts the Qur'an. Okay. If it looks like there's a sunnah contradicting the Qur'an, it is because you didn't understand the Qur'an in the proper way. Okay. Now third, and this is also very very important, although it's going to sound also kind of strange now. The way to know the Sunnah, the Sunnah is through what? You see, this is so simple. Okay, it's through hadith. It's through hadith. Now, why did he have to make that point, and he stressed this point? Why? Okay, make it more general. Okay, and people begin not just in Medina. If you're familiar with the letter between Imam Malik and who? Not Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi. I already used him. Al-Layth ibn Sa'd in Egypt. Okay, if you're familiar with this letter the letters between the two, Imam Malik argued that a way to know the Sunnah is by looking at the practices of the people of Medina. What was Al-Layth's answer to that? Al-Layth, by the way, Imam Malik heard that Layth was making fatwa or making rulings that were going against the practice of the people of Medina. Okay. So Imam Malik wrote him a letter showing why he has to follow the practice of the people of Medina. Layth answered him saying what? What was his basic argument? Naam. You passed. And his basic argument was that different Sahaba resided in different parts of the world, and their Sunnah has been passed on. So therefore, Layth lived where, by the way? He lived in Egypt. So he said that we can look to the practices of the people of Egypt and also say that's the Sunnah, that it came from the Sahaba. Okay? And this was the same thing in Iraq. So this point became very important. That, look, it's not the practices of the people. And he brings many examples of the people of Medina where they are violating the practices of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And he even brings examples from the Sahaba themselves, that they used to follow something, okay? They used to follow something, and then when they hear the correct hadith from the Prophet, they would change what they were doing. So for example, Umar ibn al-Khattab, he brings an example from Umar ibn al-Khattab, that he was doing something, when he heard the hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that he didn't know, he changed what he was doing. So his argument is, therefore the Sunnah isn't known by the practices of the people, but the Sunnah is known by what we can trace back to the Prophet ﷺ. In other words, the hadith literature. And this point, no doubt, came from his studies in Mecca, probably, his early studies. Not his studies in Medina, even though they're known as Ahl al-Hadith, but probably from these muhaddithin of Mecca. Okay, now.
I'm sorry, but I didn't take the history of Hadith. Was that time
Shame on you.
Hadith written, collected?
They were written down by that time, and many of them were collected.
So was there a book when?
Yes, there was already by his time there were quite a few books. Although the major works that we know today, like Imam Ahmad's Musnad or Al-Bukhari's book, they came after his time. But there were books by that time. Okay, so that's the first point related to this. That's how to say it quickly. Actions of a people do not determine the Sunnah. Okay. Now, this is the point that I was just explaining. That the actions of a people do not determine what the Sunnah is. The Sunnah is known through Hadith. Okay? And then he had a rather large debate. There's actually, this debate is mostly, you won't find it in Risala, you'll find it in another book that he wrote. But this debate is about Khabr al-Wahid. Is that right? Alif Saud? It's not proportional spacing. Yes, it is. I gave the dal less space and I gave the waw. This is proportional spacing. Okay, what is this? What is this and what was the debate about? Those of you in the hadith class, those of you from the hadith class, answer this very quickly, although we didn't really get that far. What is it, Mustafa?
0.
Everybody took an incomplete in the hadith class. We never got around to the final. Hey. Oh, okay. This is evidence that he has something there. But if it's anything that isn't mutawatir, okay, any hadith which is not mutawatir.
Or 110.
Okay, any hadith which isn't mutawatir. Mutawatir is a report that in every generation it's narrated by so many people that we have no doubt or there's no doubt that they did not lie about it, or they did not make it up themselves. No. Okay. That is mutawatir. This was, of course, accepted by everyone, mutawatir hadith. The debate was over this. Okay? And specifically, the debate was with the people from Iraq. Khabar al-Wahid, there's no... What? This is not a good translation, but just to appease Mr. Amir, I would like to... No. I told you, in the United States, you stay with your title. Solitary reports. Actually, anything which is not mutawatir. Okay? Mutawatir is continuous transmission. It's not also not a good also not a good translation. Right? Okay. Right, what was the debate? Yes. This is a different class. Yes, it's also called ahad. At that time, though, basically they used this term. Imam Shafi'i in Risala, he used this term. He's talking about ahad hadith. No. What's that? There is no minimum. There is no minimum. No. It depends on the situation. Yeah, if there is, for example, someone in Baghdad who is trustworthy and someone in Egypt who is trustworthy, they never met each other and there's no way they could have communicated on it, even though they're just two, and they are becoming close to mutawatir. Mutawatir, the condition is that we know that there's no way they could have forged this hadith or made the same mistake. Mustahil, yani unacceptable to think that way. So there's no actual number limit. This is the strongest opinion. Yes, what is the debate about? We're trying to get there. What was the debate here?
Can we accept the Qabr al-Ahad for Aqidah?
Actually, not just Aqidah. This was a little bit different debate. Now you're getting after this time. They weren't that. They weren't that. What can I say? Sophisticated, to put it. What was the debate about here? You did that? Okay. The people of Iraq, some of the fuqaha of Iraq, and as I said last time, because lots of forgers of hadith were in Iraq, and they didn't have that many hadith, they had a tendency to doubt solitary reports. Okay. And it is claimed, I said it's claimed because there's some question about this. It is claimed, for example, that they preferred qiyas, or they preferred analogy sometimes over solitary reports. No, it is hujjat, not thubut, hujjat. La, yani can it be used as a proof, whether it is authentic or not? Their claim is, okay, their claim is that if there's a solitary report from the Prophet, and this especially if it's something that refers to things that people do a lot, okay. They said that, and if there's such a report like that, and it doesn't become very famous, for example, something related to the salat, like putting your hands, for example, up here in the salat, okay, this should be known by everybody, according to them, because it's something everyone does. So if you bring just one or two reports that says the Prophet ﷺ put his hands up here, according to them, that's not very strong. Iraqis. Not Saddam Hussein and his people. Okay. Naam, yes? Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. What Imam Shafi'i said is that anything that we can prove has been narrated from the Prophet ﷺ, from authentic sources with an unbroken chain, we have to accept it. In other words, it is a hujjah above any other proof. It is a proof above any other proof, along with the Qur'an. we cannot refer to qiyas, we cannot refer to amal ahl al-Medina, we have to accept it, even if it's not mutawatir. Yes, yes. What he's saying here basically is that if we have a report from the Prophet that we have to believe in, we have no reason to doubt it, it takes precedence over anything, regardless of whether it comes through us through mutawatir chains or not. Okay? For example, there is a report, let's see if I can say it or get it correct, that if you buy, for example, a camel, a female camel from someone else, it's good. I feel sorry for those camels in the desert these days, but anyway, if you buy a female camel from someone else and you decide to return it, okay, and you milked it and you decide to return it, you should return it with what?
With the money.
No. Yeah, with some tamar. A sa'a of tamar. Tamar, that's English. Dates. Okay? You should return it with some dates. Actually, I think this is actually referring to sheep. Okay? So these people, the Iraqis, said no. They said this doesn't, first of all, it's khabar wahid. Therefore, we're not constrained to act by it. That's their point of view. Again, it is claimed that Abu Hanifa is one of these, but Abu Hanifa made a statement that shows that he's against it. But it began to be the madhab of Iraq. So therefore, since it's khabar wahid, we judge it by other things. We judge it by qiyas. According to them, qiyas goes against this hadith. So therefore, they reject the hadith. Okay?
No, like Imam al-Shafi'i, what report would he be basing on?
Imam Shafi'i would say, even though this hadith isn't mutawatir, we have to accept and we have to apply it.
Was there a consensus among the ulama and the after that we should see?
Yes, after him, things changed quite a bit. We'll get to that. Things changed a lot. And always, there was a group of people called Ahl al-Hadith, a little bit different from what I described earlier, that always believed in this. Some of them lived in Iraq. Okay? But as a madhab known as the Iraqi madhab, this was a problem. Now.
There is a contrast between khabar ahad and mutawatir.
That's something else, okay? I'll get to that also. Yes.
Comment. Imam Ghazali, Sheikh Ghazali,
Mu'asir?
he mentioned in his book that many ulama and Salaf actually rejected hadith ahad when they come to al-ahkam.
When it comes to aqidah. Yeah. Not the Salaf. This is in later years. We may get to that's in the hadith class, not in this class, but we may talk about it later. Yani the Salafi position or the position of the Salaf is they accepted khabar wahid or ahad regardless of whether it was aqidah or ahkam. Hey, tamam. Okay, the third point, and this also seems kind of strange. Now again, remember what I'm saying. I'm saying that Imam Shafi'i tried to take back the usul back to the way it was during the time of the Sahaba, Khulafa Rashidun. And he brought examples. For example, here, he brought many examples from Umar ibn Khattab. When he heard the thing from one person, he would change his madhab. He would change his opinion.
That person is qualified.
Yeah. And there's some reports that Abu Bakr and Umar always required two people. This isn't true. Sometimes they did, and those for specific reasons. But in general, no.
What's his argument?
Yeah, he has a lengthy argument, but basically is that, and he makes an analogy over the case of witnesses and other things. But basically, what he's saying is that if the report comes from us, from people who we trust, have no reason to doubt, and they trace it back to the Prophet, then there's no way we can say it's not the Sunnah. There's no way we can say this wasn't the statement. Reports, okay, for the Hadith, and he insisted that the Hadith should have complete chains of transmission. The Isnad should have complete change. In other words, he's rejecting munqata, or as it was generally known at that time, mursal hadith. Okay? These are hadith whose chains are broken. What do we mean by chains are broken? Chains are broken meaning there's someone missing in the chains. Okay? Okay, during that time, mursal hadith, mursal was kind of used in general. Almost to mean the same thing as munqata. In the terminology of the muhaddithin, mursal has a different meaning, more specific. But at that time it was general. Okay? Now the strange thing that was going on at that time was, although these fuqaha in Iraq and in also Malik school in Medina, they were somewhat suspicious about khabr al-wahid or al-ahad. At the same time they used to accept munqata hadith or mursal hadith. How does that? Okay, they have doubts about reports which are solitary, and at the same time they accept reports whose chains are broken. Double standard? Huh? Okay, for one thing, the argument was there. Now, you have to realize that the people of hadith, the real scholars of hadith, were a little bit different from the fuqaha. Okay? So for example, if we want to study the science of hadith at that time, to see how they use this. Now, one of the tricks of the mustashriqeen, by the way, the Orientalists. You're familiar with what I mean by Orientalists? I know you know mustashriqeen. Orientalists are non-Muslims who are writing about Islam. Okay? One of the tricks that they used to use, for example, Shakht, and people like him, he's one of the leading Orientalists, gold seekers. Shakht, yeah. Shakht. Gold seekers, yeah, both of them. Both of them are Germans. Okay? One of the tricks that they did is they wanted to prove actually that hadith were of late origin. Okay? We talked about this in the hadith class. Don't look so awkwardly. In fact, Shakht even said that the better looking the isnad, the more proof that the hadith is forged. But anyway, that always cracks me up when I hear that statement. What they did is they went to the books of fiqh. Okay? They went to the early books of fiqh, and they used the books of fiqh to prove that the isnad or the chain of transmission was not used in the early years. Okay. Now this might be able to fool some people, because you have to distinguish during those early years between the books of the muhaddithin, okay, the books of the people of hadith, and the books of fiqh. Okay. The books of fiqh were not meant to be recording the hadith, but they simply meant to refer to the hadith. So therefore they would not always put the chains. In fact, many times they didn't put the chains. Okay? But at the same time, there's the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he's describing the virtues of the first 3 generations. And then after that he said that lying will appear, and so forth and so on. So especially for the people in Iraq, and if the person is one of their teachers, one of their shuyukh, if he relates the hadith even if it doesn't have any chain to it, they will accept it. And similar was the case with Imam Malik. And if you look to Al-Muwatta of Imam Malik, and he is arguing by or using as hujjah hadith which are munqata or muslim. So one of the big changes that Imam Shafi made, or one of the things that he called for, he said that in order for us to base our rulings on hadith, the hadith have to have complete chains. Okay?
In order to be able to use it
in order to be able to use it as a proof. In order to be able to prove that it's true, actually. And he gave conditions for the narrators. Okay? He gave conditions for the narrators which are similar to those conditions we stated in the hadith class for Sahih Hadith. And he said he studied most of the mursal hadith, which actually means munqata. He studied most of the mursal hadith, and he found that most of them didn't have any source for them whatsoever. Okay? So again, it seems like a minor point, but these points are actually very big points. Okay, and actually also this one. No? Mursal, yeah. Okay, there's a difference between Mursal of the Sahaba and Mursal of others. Okay. Again, that's another course. That's the other course. Okay. Fourth, what was the fourth thing? Oh. Also with respect to this is he refuted the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila. Okay. He refuted the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila who doubted not the... No Rafida. Oh. Right. And these people did not doubt, and you have to make this, Khalaf al-Ghani in his PhD dissertation, he makes this very clear. These people did not doubt the authenticity of the Sunnah or the authority of the Sunnah. Okay, they didn't doubt the authority of the Sunnah, but they doubted the authenticity of Hadith. Okay, and the main reason that they doubted the authenticity of the Hadith is because they said they are contradictory. Okay, they said that they are contradictory. Muta'arif. Hadith. They looked at hadith and they said, look, this hadith says one thing, the other one says the opposite thing, and so forth. So therefore they doubted all hadith literature. Okay? Mu'tazila. Okay? And Imam Shafi was the first person to write the book, and Risala is just one chapter. But he has a separate work called Ikhtilaf al-Hadith, in which he shows that these hadith that they claim are contradictory are in fact not contradictory. You just have to understand them. He was the first, he is the one who started the science of Ikhtilaf al-Hadith. And because one hadith says the Prophet ﷺ used to do one thing and the other one says he did the opposite, that kind of thing. Yes. Mukhtalaf al-Hadith, no. Actually his is called Ikhtilaf al-Hadith. That's right. It is in Kitab al-Is now published in, I don't know how many volumes, I don't remember. But the Kitab in the fourth volume, it contains many other works. One of the works is this one, Ikhtilaf al-Hadith. Okay. As I said in the Risala, it is just one small chapter. Okay, fourth, and I alluded to this one earlier. Now. Yes. They doubted the authenticity of what was being reported as hadith. Well, I mean, it was such a big doubt that they said, okay, we're going to leave all hadith. As I said, he deals with them quite politely in Risala, and a little bit tougher in Al-Ummah and Ikhtilaf al-Hadith.
So how do they follow the Sunnah?
The Khawarij?
If you refute the hadith.
طبعا, by the way, every time we refer to any madhab, this is true in this class and anywhere, you'll always find some difference. I mean, not everyone necessarily among them had this opinion. Okay? For example, I'm going to talk a little bit about other Mu'tazila who came later. They accept hadith. Al-Khawarij in general, they didn't accept hadith. They said the woman, for example, who is on her period, she has to pray. They said that you can marry a woman and her sister or her aunt at the same time, and because they didn't accept hadith.
Are those madhabs still existing now?
Mu'tazila seem to be making a comeback, that's for sure. The modern version of the Mu'tazila. Well, this group of Khawarij, I don't think it exists anymore. The one I'm referring to. Yeah, but the ones I'm referring to, I don't believe they exist anymore. Yani they were either killed by... Yani they were very violent people. And they had a tendency to die off. No.
So that's non-existent madhab.
The Khawarij that I'm referring to there, no. The Mu'tazila, there's a brand of Mu'tazila around today. Yeah, Brian. Mu'tazila? No, most of the Mu'tazila are Shia. In history, when you study philosophy or ilm al-kalam, most of the Shia and Mu'tazila go together. طيب ها SHI Shia. طيب he proved that no one statement was what can I say, was a hujjah or a proof. What's the rest of it? If there exists some text, okay, some text, in other words, a verse in the Qur'an or hadith. Okay? And in other words, if there's a verse in the Qur'an or a hadith about something and someone comes along and he says something that goes against it, we reject that person's statement. Okay? This point is very important because in both the Iraqi and in the Maliki madhab, the statements of the Sahaba, and also even Tabi'een, and sometimes these statements were raised to the point that people would follow them instead of hadith. Notice that all of these things I'm referring to, they actually existed during the time of the Khulafa Rashidin, whatever, in English. In that sentence, let's see. No. Oh, I'm sorry. You had a question?
The Khawarij do not believe in Ahadith and not believe. So how can they follow the Sunnah and still not believe in Hadith?
They believe theoretically in the authenticity of the Sunnah, but they said the Sunnah has not come down to us. So they didn't, in other words. The answer is they didn't.
It exists, but it's not there.
Yes, we don't have it anymore. It's lost. Yeah. Okay? Is this point clear? This is also very important. All of these things, Imam Shafi'i revolutionized usul al-fiqh so much that almost all of these things to us seem just commonplace. Okay. Yeah? Could you two please be quiet? You're bothering him. Verse and hadith. طيب. Okay. Inshallah. I'm sorry. Okay. Now the fifth point is one of his weakest aspects. No. This is 3. A, B, C, D are under 3. This is the Dewey Decimal System. See, it was going so well. Look, Ahmed. This is A, by the way. Just to confuse you more. But this is, by the way, one of his weakest areas. This discussion of ijma' or consensus. Okay. There was many things that the people of Iraq and the people of Medina claimed was ijma'. Okay. So therefore he tried to limit really what is ijma'. He really defined what is ijma'. And it seems he went through 2 stages. If you read Kitab and you read Al-Risala, he went through 2 stages, not clear exactly what are those 2 stages. Which was first, which was second. Okay? In one place, for example in Al-Risala, he says the only thing in which there is ijma' or consensus are the obligatory duties that everyone knows. Okay? Because at that time he's taking ijma' to mean everyone of the ummah has to agree on it. And basically he's saying that the only thing that exists ijma' are al-fara'id, that everyone knows. 5 prayers, zakat, this kind of thing. Because at that time he was talking about ijma' as being the agreement of the whole ummah. And he was the first one to bring a Quranic verse in support of ijma'. And the other people were using it, but they didn't really have the evidence for it. He was the first one to provide evidence, but at the same time, he doubted, especially after the time of the Sahaba, he doubted whether in fact any ijma' actually existed. Another way that he looked at it is he considered ijma' to be the ijma' of the ulama. Okay. And if you look at it that way, obviously there are more things that you can consider ijma'. But the thing that he argued against, and I think this was kind of secondary to him, it wasn't that important. What is ijma'? Because he believed that in general it didn't really exist. And I think he influenced his students, Imam Ahmed, in the same way, to have the same kind of idea. But the thing that he was arguing against here is there's no such thing as a local jama'ah, which can be a local ijma', which can be considered hujjah or a proof. Okay, what's he talking about there? Okay, the most important one probably, and it's true, Iraq had the same idea, but the most important one is Imam Malik's school. Amal Ahl Medina, the actions of the people of Medina. Okay, they used to refer to any, and if you tried to pin them in the corner, and about some things, they'll say this is ijma'. This is ijma'. What they mean by that is it's ijma' of the people of Medina. And really what they mean by that is ijma' of the fuqaha sab'a, sometimes, the 7 fuqaha of Medina. So his argument basically is that if you go to the Qur'an and Hadith, there's no evidence that any particular people can be taken as ijma'. Okay, that's his argument here. That you cannot take, for example, the people of Medina and say if they agree upon something it's ijma' and that's hujjah upon everybody. He said this is nonsense. Okay, that's his point. They said it is not a very strong discussion of ijma', but his point was to get rid of this.
So, what's your definition of ijma'?
His definition, he had 2. One basically is that, we'll discuss ijma' later. But basically he was saying that ijma' is the whole ummah. Sometimes he referred to it that way. Sometimes he referred to it as saying the ijma' of the scholars. It seems that he went from one opinion to the other over time, but it's not sure which is his latter opinion.
And he said that the look ijma'.
Hey, that's what I think, and this discussion is kind of secondary to him. The important thing was to prove this point. There's no such thing as the local ijma'.
Do you agree?
Pardon? Oh, sure. There's no such thing as local ijma'. No question about it. Right, Mustafa? Now his weakest point is his discussion of ijma'. One of his weakest points. We'll get to another one. Okay. Any questions about that? Now, Tafadhal.
Did he reject the ijma'?
The what?
And the claim of ijma' altogether, did he reject
Basically he limited it to these things, the obligatory duties.
So ijma' only
Very few things. In other words, he is almost wiping out ijma'. And
I understood that he accepted ijma' as a theory, but he said this didn't happen.
yes. Oh yeah, he proves it. He proves ijma' as a source of law. But then he goes on to say that either it only exists in very few things or it is hard to prove it. And as I said, this idea he passed on to his student Ahmed ibn Hanbal, who said that anyone who claims ijma' is a liar. Or is lying. Yeah, except in the case of even Ahmed, that statement he said it in general. The Hanbalis, they accept ijma' of Sahaba because they believe it occurred. And Imam Shafi'i accepts ijma', but he doubts about when it ever occurs. So, in essence, he's not...
Like the principle of the Mu'tazila, when they say there is sunnah, but it is not.
Yeah, exactly. That's That's a good analogy. Yeah.
You
Pardon?
understand that the opposite is global?
Yes. For example, the people of Medina said that if the people of Medina agree on something, that's ijma'. That was their definition of ijma'.
No, there is two differences on how to define ijma'. There is no ijma'.
This ijma' in Medina was kind of forgotten. Shafi'i? لا. This is his saying, and he's proving that there's no such thing as ijma' of certain people. He said, okay, he's taking ijma', taking ijma' from the Quranic verse saying that you have to follow the way of the believers. Okay? Well, he says believers is everyone. So if the people of Medina agree upon something, then this isn't ijma'. You have to have agreement by everyone. That's where he got the distance. And then he discussed, actually he didn't discuss the hadith itself, but he said that the ummah is not going to agree upon an error. So he said that the ummah actually has to follow the scholars. This is in a different writing now. And if they have to follow the scholars, that means if the scholars make ijma', the people have to follow it. Yeah. Oh yeah, he had a nice debate. On that point. He said, he was talking to someone, I don't know, I think many of his debates were with the Mu'tazila. He said if you have 10 people and 9 scholars say one thing and the other one disagrees, what will you do? The guy said, I'll follow the 9. So he said, okay, if you have 10 people and 6 of them said one thing and 4 of them said something else, what will you do? He said, I'll follow the majority. He said, just because of 2 people you're going to follow one opinion and reject the other? And so he was saying that ijma' has to be everyone. Cannot, in this opinion, all of the scholars. Cannot leave out any scholar. And that is the opinion of all of the ulama. Yeah. Ijma' in general. Hey. If there's a text, then the text rules, not the ijma'. Yeah. And we'll talk about ijma' later. I'm just trying to point out some of the and this is one of his weaker points. Let me make this clear. This point is not one of his weaker points, but this one is. Now this is good because it refutes the North African view. That's why it's view. Now? Okay, first of all, you were asleep during the first part, so this might have some effect. Okay, what do you understand from it? Okay, let's. زي Medina. No. As hujjah for everyone? No. He is saying that, look, if the people in Medina agree upon something, and there's another scholar, let's say like a Sahaba who's in Kufa and he disagrees. So why is this hujjah? There's no proof that that's hujjah. Yeah? That's this one. That's why he said, the only thing there's ijma' is on the obligatory duty. That's the only thing we know that everyone accepts. We'll discuss ijma' later. It's on the reading list. Let's leave it at that. Now. That's a good point. That's a good question. We'll get to that. Later. But the sixth point is he tried to restrain or constrain the use of aql and ijtihad. Okay? He tried to constrain the use of aql and ijtihad. Okay? By showing, again, lots of his writings are in the form of debates. He's saying something to someone. Oh, aql is this one. Aql is reasoning. Okay, reasoning. Well, ijtihad is juristic reasoning about something there's no text. But what happened before his time is ijtihad became kind of wider than that. Even though there was Qur'an and Sunnah, some people still made ijtihad. So he tried to confine these by showing that any aql or any ra'i actually that goes against the Quran wa Sunnah has to be rejected. Okay? Any ra'i that goes against the Quran wa Sunnah has to be rejected. Number 7, also he constrained the use of qiyas. Qiyas is deductive, okay, just a minute. Deductive analogy.
When you said constrain the use of aql ijtihad, as long as it doesn't
constrain it by putting it within the confines of the Quran and Sunnah.
What's the difference between point 4 and 6? It's the same statement.
Probably the way you get to it. I mean, here you're actually using naql, right? Okay, you're not using aql. This is a report from a Sahaba and you follow it. Okay, here the individual is using his mind and coming up with a decision. Okay. Constrain the use of qiyas. This is also very important because before his time, qiyas, especially in Iraq, was kind of haphazard.
What?
Chaotic. Haphazard. And without nizam or without rules. Okay? It was the first one to record rules, and really to talk about how to make qiyas. Okay? How to make qiyas. And he stressed that there should be strong resemblance between the original case, and the case you're making qiyas for. Okay? He stressed strong resemblance. Okay, what I mean by that is, you'll find people, they take some case, some hadith, okay? And they'll find some other case, something happens new, and there's very little resemblance between the hadith and the new case. But they'll make qiyas. Okay? He said no. He said there has to be strong resemblance. In other words, he's trying to distinguish between a valid qiyas and an invalid qiyas. Also, he said that the sources for qiyas are the Quran and Sunnah. Qiyas means, again, analogy. Is the Quran and Sunnah. Sources for qiyas is the Quran and Sunnah. Sources. Now, what do I mean by that? That's part of it, actually, yeah. Cannot make qiyas on another qiyas. Someone makes qiyas from the Quran, hadith. So you take this new qiyas as the source case, and you make qiyas from that. Subcase. He says you can't do that because he shows that if you do that enough, there's not going to be any relationship between the final case and the hadith. And you always have to refer to the hadith. But also some people, and this is the same argument that Ibn Taymiyyah had many years later, and some people talked about applying certain rules. For example, the one I mentioned earlier about when you return the camel or the sheep, you have to return it with amounts of dates. They said that this goes against qiyas. Okay? His argument was, well, how can you say it goes against qiyas when we're talking about the source of qiyas? And the hadith is the source, you can't question it. So how can you say something goes against it? And in other words, he's arguing that there's no hadith, no verse in the Quran that goes against correct analogy. Okay? And as I said, Ibn Taymiyyah in his book on Qiyas, he put up the same argument much later. And number in C down here. This is a minor point. Ahmed, 7C. Under 7. He tried to constrain or tried to narrow down who can make Qiyas. He tried to restrict who can make qiyas. In other words, he said there are some qualifications for the person to make qiyas. Number one, he has to know the Arabic language. Okay? If he doesn't know the Arabic language, he's going to make qiyas and he's not going to understand the original case.
Not my knowledge of Arabic language.
Pardon?
Because you have to know.
What do you mean?
You have to know. kind of knowledge that I have.
طيب okay. لا يعني for the one who's making qiyas. He didn't call it shurut al-mujtahid, although he said that qiyas and ijtihad are the same thing, so you can take it that way. And they also must know the Qur'an and must know the hadith. Okay, if you don't know the Qur'an and hadith, you're going to make qiyas on something and maybe go against the hadith. Okay. So he also, before this time, anyone, as we say in English, every Tom, Dick and Harry was making qiyas. Write that down. It will help you in the English course also. Every Tom, Dick and Harry was making qiyas before this time. And he narrowed it down. He said, if you want to make qiyas, you should meet these qualifications. Okay? What else? I hope, is that it? See? Where is it? And the eighth one, the eighth part of his ijtihad or tajdeed. Now listen to the last one. He rejects what is known as istihsan. Okay. We will discuss istihsan in more detail later. Okay. This is now the weakest. I said before ijma'. This is now the weakest part of his argument. Okay. Because he said whoever makes istihsan or this thing, he is actually making laws.
What's the definition?
Well, you see, that's why the reason I didn't translate is because his. Hey, what did I say? Equity? What? No, that's istishab. No, it should be there though. Equity, yeah. Okay. Let me tell you why this is the worst part or the weakest part of his argument. And Al-Jassas, Abu Bakr al-Razi, and he refuted him rather strongly in his book on Usul Fiqh. Because his definition of istihsan is not the Iraqi definition. Okay, so this, what he's calling this is not the same thing as what the Iraqis were doing. Okay. He called this istihsan having pleasure with law. According to him, istihsan is that someone sits and he just says, well, I think this is the best idea. No. He's sitting there, he has to sit. The sun is done in a sitting position. And he says that he takes, this is the way he describes it. Now this is not the correct description. He may be, I just told you, according to the Iraqi definition, he may be describing something that he saw people do in Iraq. But this is not the Hanafi istihsan that he's talking about. And this is where, for example, you look at the rulings, and if you make qiyas, it says you should do something, and you just decide that, well, I don't like this ruling, I think this is better. هذه أحسن. Hey.
When you come up with your own?
Pretty much. Okay? That's what he's saying is istihsan. The real thing, or the real Hanafi thing, in other words, this is a straw man argument. Anyone know what a straw man argument is? This is logic. Straw man argument. Straw man argument. Straw man argument is, you know what a straw man is? Man made out of straw. Okay, in the view. Not a scarecrow. Straw man arguments. Isn't this class so useful? You can use it in. Straw man argument is you make an argument that doesn't really exist and then you refute it. This is basically what he did. And he defined istihsan in his own way, and then he said this is nonsense. Anyway.
When you say Iraqi, when you talk about Iraqi definition, you find it in the Hanafi madhab?
Yes. Okay, the Hanafi definition, or the way, and again we're going to talk about istihsan later. What they're saying basically is that you look at a situation and there is, for example, two analogies that you can make. this analogy looks stronger, but when you look at the results of that analogy, they'll be more damaging than the results of this analogy. So therefore you follow the weaker analogy. Did you catch my point? Again, we'll discuss it again later. We'll come back to it. Text 22, yeah. Okay, you have two analogies, two qiyas. Okay? This one is stronger than this one. Okay, so this is up here. Look. Write it down in your notes this way. Okay. But when you look at the results of this one, you see that they might lead to some damaging results, going against the maslahah of what the Sharia is intended for. So therefore you follow this qiyas. This is what they meant. Shafi'i looked at it as saying, well look, I don't like this qiyas, so I'm going to follow something else. That's not exactly what they meant by it. So this was one of his weaker arguments, because he did not really define istihsan properly. Istihsan. Any question? We started late, so we can go a few minutes. Any question? Hey. Basically the Hanafi or the Iraqi madhab. Pardon? Just a minute, please.
Particular example of why you want to consider the use of example.
Yeah, he has many examples. None of them come to my mind, but in the Risala he has many examples. Hassan al-Basri is very early. Okay, basically those are the 8 points and the minor points below them, Ahmed, of his Risala. Okay? Next time, inshallah, we'll start out with what effect did this have? Okay? And as I said, almost all of these things, you can go back to the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the time of the Sahaba. And he is trying to take usul al-fiqh back to the way it's supposed to be used. Okay? That's why he's called mujaddid by many people.